The way that this is going to work is that Mr. Atwal has prepared a written statement. He will be reading it to you. You've already received copies. I think the people who are, some people who might be listening in have received copies. There are two documents that we will refer to under when I'm questioned, I assume, that will be disclosed via electronic copy. There's a bit of vetting that has to be done, and those refer to a parole report. And some visas that were issued by the Indian government in 2017. So with that said, I guess let's begin. Mr. Atwal will read his statement for everyone.
Since my attendance to reception for the Prime Minister in India, I have been completely overwhelmed by the coverage that has occurred in the press. I don't fault the press for the reporting, but I do want everyone to appreciate how difficult it is for the person who becomes center for the international media attention. As my lawyer mentioned, I will now provide my statement for the record. My counsel will be answering any question on my behalf. If there are any questions he is not able to answer, I will make my best effort to provide a clear response very shortly. Almost 40 years ago, I, like many other Sikhs, become caught up a movement supporting an independent Sikh nation. Well, nothing can excuse my conduct. I can only say that during that time, in the early 1980s, I reacted to the Indian Army storming a golden temple in Amritsar in a way that has caused much pain to many individuals. 32 years ago, in 1986, I committed great offense to my minister state from India who was making a personal visit to British Columbia. I was convicted of attempted murder in 1987. I have nothing but regret and remorse for my action and the suffering I caused to the victim. What I did was described as an act of terror by the judge who dealt with this matter. I expect full responsibility. I do not disagree with the court's conclusion. In 1987, I was sentenced for the 20-year imprisonment. After serving approximately 5 years of my sentence, I was granted day parole. I deserved the punishment I received, and I have done my best to redeem myself and to become someone who contributes to Canada and the Indian community. I am now almost 63 years old. I'm a husband, father, and grandfather. I again renounce any form of terrorism. I do not advocate in any sense for an independent Sikh nation. I, like the vast majority of Sikhs who once advocated for the cause, have reconciled with the nation of India. India has been reconciling with these same Sikhs who once sought independence. Canada is my home, India is my homeland. I am very proud of Canadian and Indian heritage. I have been active in the community in Canada. I have done my best to give back and take on a leadership role where necessary, and to help where I'm needed. I have engaged with my political process and have tried to make sure the needs of my community were addressed. I have met politicians who have wanted to reach out the Indian community. I have had assist with making sure the Indian community was able to communicate with politicians. I have acted this way whether the politicians were from the NDP, Liberal or Conservative. I have been photographed with many politicians from all parties. I have visited in India numerous times since my release from custody, most recently in 2017 and 2018. I visited India 2 times in 2017 and once so far 2018. Each time I visited in India, I was given visa by the Indian government. At all time I visited India lawfully and with the full permission of the Indian government. There were no restrictions placed on me by Canada so that I could not travel. In late December and early January of this year, I made plan to once again travel to India. Before leaving Vancouver, I reached out to Mr. Sarai to see whether there was any possibility of attending the reception for the Prime Minister during the government to India. I was eventually provided invitation by the Canadian ambassador and attended the reception. When my attendance became the news story that bring us here today, I was completely shocked and devastated. When I asked to consider attending the reception, I had assumed there would be no problem. No one had any point indicate there would be any issue. On this previous occasion in 2013 and 2014, I had visited to the House of Commons in Ottawa and been provided with clear visitor pass. In the end, I'm sorry for the embarrassment this matter has caused to Canada, India, my community and family and friends. However, I want to again stress this terrible event that happened in the past are something I live with every day and to take complete responsibility for. I just like the Sikh community and Indian generally have moved on from the issue that divided us almost 40 years ago. I hope we can all have the opportunity to see our fault and take responsibility for our action that cause harm. I hope we can all do our best to correct the behavior and become contributing member of society. Thank you for your time today. My lawyer will answer further questions. If he is not able to answer a specific question, I will do my best to provide him proper and clear response shortly. Thank you.
Just slide down to the microphone. Quite far away.
Sorry.
Just slide down.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you.
Look, I'm sure nobody has any questions.
Technical, I have one question here.
You do. So, yeah, go ahead.
So, just was wondering if your client can answer this one. There's a controversy going on that maybe Indian agencies had something to do with this whole controversy. What is his position on that?
Mr. Atwal at no point has considered himself or been approached in such a fashion by any Indian representative that he would act as an agent of some sort. There is some bandying about of the word informant. That is not correct. He absolutely denies that. If somebody wishes to go on the record and provide proof, whether documentary proof or give their actual name as to who's making those accusations, he'll be extremely happy to deal with that, and we'll wait to hear from that. So it's denied.
Why did Mr. Atwal want to attend this event with the Prime Minister in the first place?
Mr. Atwal has, throughout his involvement with the Indo-Canadian community, attended many events. He was in India at the time. He has attended functions where Mr. Trudeau, before he was Prime Minister, I'm not sure if it was after as well, but certainly before he was Prime Minister, was in attendance and was the guest of honor. He is politically engaged, and he reached out to Mr. Sarai very casually and said, if there's a possibility of me going, then I would like to go. That was the end of it. It was no more controversial than that.
Given Mr. Atwal's criminal past, does he concede that it could be discomfiting
politicians to appear with politicians, to be in pictures with politicians. Some politicians would be uneasy about being framed.
No, absolutely. I've been.
Absolutely what?
Absolutely. Does he agree that the reason we're here today is because clearly there was some discomfort with what has occurred? I mean, that's an obvious position, and he doesn't dispute that. I think what Mr. Atwal is here today to make sure is clear. And there's a secondary theme that we want to get into over and above Mr. Atwal specifically, which I'll get to. But what he wants to make clear is he has been welcomed on numerous occasions by political parties of all stripes to their events. Let me finish. He basically went to this occasion, put his name in. He assumed he was vetted appropriately. He's not hid who he was. He's not changed his name. If you Google Mr. Atwal, you'll find information about him. It's not as if the fact that the events that occurred, again, almost 4 decades ago, were not in the news. If you're I'm not saying this is trying to put words in your mouth, but if somehow you're flipping the onus on him to say he should have done something differently, all he can say is this: he went through the proper channels. He did what he thought was, again, not an extremely aggressive request, simply just if there's availability and a space for me and I can get in, I'd like to go, and that was it. And when this whole matter exploded, he removed himself from the situation. So I'm not sure what more I think needs to be answered about that. But
If he acknowledges discomfort, why does he pose for pictures with politicians in Canada?
I'm sorry, there's
Yeah. What efforts were made by security personnel, either Canadian or Indian, to vet Mr. Atwal as a general guest of these events in India?
Oh, he has no idea because that's not his.
He wasn't approached
He
at
can't.
all?
He can't speak to that. He was never approached to.
By CSIS or
No,
RCMP?
absolutely not. He's again. This is not the first time that he has gone to a political event. And again, I think it's very clear. Let's make sure this is on the record that Mr. Atwal presents absolutely no security threat to this country or any other country. And the best example of that is the one country that was, I mean, Canada was affected obviously, but directly affected by the incident that occurred was India. An Indian national, a state politician, was almost killed by Mr. Atwal. He doesn't deny that. India has let him back into the country to visit. India provided 3 visas in 2017. One was a visa for 1 month. He had to reapply in the summertime of last year, and he was given a 3-month visa. He was then given a 1-year visa late in the year. Now, if India has no problem with him attending, given the concern, and security officials that have been reported in the media have been quoted as saying he doesn't pose a threat, he was a political embarrassment apparently to the Prime Minister, and that, that's obviously accepted. With that said, the fact that he was not approached did not surprise him, but if there is further measures that need to be taken, that's up to the government. Again, Mr. Atwal is here today to say that he's gotten in the middle of this. He is a contributing member of society and he wants to get on with things. And he's here today to deal with this as best he can.
How did he get removed from the blacklist?
Oh, as I understand, and again, this is probably a question for India. India, again, as I understand it, has been reevaluating subjects that were on the blacklist on a continual basis. Mr. Atwal wasn't the only person that I understand was removed last year. I have no first-hand knowledge, but what I understand is that there was about 150, if not more, people that were removed at the same time that Mr. Atwal was removed. My understanding, again, is that the Indian government seeks reconciliation in a lot of fashion. And on that basis, he was allowed to travel. There was no, at any point, illegal entry on the part of Mr. Atwal to India. At no point.
Can you tell us
Gabriel,
what
I just
Mr.
want to draw
Atwal's-
you out a little bit further here. How would you describe Mr. Atwal's relationship with government officials in India and Indian diplomats in Canada? You say he's not acting as an agent, so have diplomats there or here ever asked him for help or advice? What kind of relationship does
The
he
only
have with them?
relationship that Mr. Atwal has that he's here to advise anybody of today, that I'm aware of and I've been made aware of, is that he has facilitated radio interviews because he's involved in the media. But as far as being some sort of agent, as I said. If somebody wants to give me a specific example of when he's done this or what evidence they have of this, I'd like to hear it.
Does he have friends who are
No,
diplomats there?
I've said to you, do you have a specific example that I can address? Because I'd love to do it. Do you have one?
Just trying to get a better sense of his
I got
relationship.
a question, which is, and I'm happy to answer. Do you
Well,
have?
that's Mr.
Let me
Atwal.
finish. Let me finish. I've got a specific question for you, which is, do you have an example of anything he's done that I can answer? Because I'd love to do it.
Did Mr. Atwal have any contact with diplomats, the consulates, so on and so forth, outside of the normal application process for visas?
I have no information that he did that. I don't believe that that was the case. I'll confirm that with him and get back if you'll, again, send me, we'll be happy to answer that question. But as I said, there was nothing in Mr. Atwal's behavior that should cause anyone concern. And again, and I'll say this again for probably the 5th or 6th time, if anybody has a specific accusation that they can point to, I'd like to hear it, because that's no different. I don't mean any disrespect in saying, can you tell me when you stopped snorting cocaine? You know, did you, like, you know, I mean, how does he prove a negative? I'm not saying you do it all, but that's the absurdity of the question. If I have a specific example of misbehavior, I'll put it to you. If you want to give me a specific example where somebody can say, hey, he was seen in the company of this person for hours, and then immediately after he did this, then let's get that out there. He's not hiding from that. But give me that before anybody asks questions. They're just based on really specious accusations. That's really disgraceful, quite frankly.
It's not an accusation, it's a simple question. What kind of relationship does he have with Indian diplomats?
There is nothing more than a relationship that where you facilitate contact with radio stations and say that you want to be interviewing the Punjabi community, any more than you'd be facilitating contact with members of the Indian community in Canada. So there's no close relationship with any diplomats. And again, if somebody has information to the contrary, let's hear it.
Mr. Trudeau, can you tell us about the relationship between Mr. Atwal and Randeep Sarai? It says in his statement that you approached him for an invitation to this event. What is the relationship?
It's nothing more than Mr. Atwal and Mr. Sarai being part of the same community. Mr. Atwal is involved in politics, and he knows Mr. Sarai on that basis. They don't.
Are they friends? Are they?
They're friends in the sense that they're friendly. I would not at all characterize them as being buddies, if I can put it that way. But they're acquainted with the same way Mr. Atwal is acquainted with many politicians, whether it's Conservatives or Liberals or the NDP. That's what he's been. That's what he's been involved in.
You said that he's been invited to other events, or other events with politicians from other parties. Can you tell me the names of those politicians? What were those events?
We're not. Look, what I'll say this: I've put that on the record on his behalf. If there's any politician who wants to specifically deny at some point that they've never had contact with him, he'll deal with that. I say at this point, politicians, and I'm not here to put anybody on the spot, but politicians in all parties have dealt with Mr. Atwal on a completely professional basis. If anybody wants to come forward again and deny that they had, South Asian politicians most particularly, deny that they've ever had anything to do with him, they should put that forward, and if it's not true, we'll deal with it. But other than that, he can simply say he's had contact, he's gone to engagements. If you want to have specific examples, we can attempt to put that together for you. Again, if you leave your information, we'll get back to you on that point. I'll make a note of it.
Since India has been saying that Canada is patronizing Khalistanis, and Mr. Atwal is a changed man now, he's saying that he's a proud Canadian of Indian heritage. What is his position on what India is doing right now? I mean, attacking Canada consistently on Khalistan issue.
He doesn't. What? Sorry, Mr. Atwal is not some sort of diplomatic member of the Canadian Foreign Service. Mr. Atwal is a private citizen that's engaged in the political process, that's made his position pretty clear as to what his involvement is. Now, I think, you know, how can he possibly comment on what India has been doing? I think, other than saying, I think that there has been movement on the Canadian side and on the Indian side to hopefully seek some sort of rapprochement on the relationship on this issue. But there's always going to be tensions. But I want to, if you'll keep asking questions for a few more minutes anyways, but I want to also make sure there's another theme here, which I alluded to earlier, a secondary thing, and it's part of why I am involved in this case, which is one of the issues is specific, obviously, to Mr. Atwal, okay, which is his actions that he takes responsibility for, what's occurred, his right to be in the public sphere, despite the embarrassment it may cause, his right to have pictures of himself taken if other politicians want to do that. Again, he's not hidden. There's a secondary issue, and this is much more broad, but it is this issue of an obsession, if I can put it that way, with some members of the media particular members, with a struggle between militants who caused great violence from the Sikh community in India and here, and the Indian government, that occurred when I'm 51 this year. That occurred when I was in grade 10, okay? That was in the 80s. Now, people have to move past things, and if you talk to any respectable member of the Punjabi community, the South Asian community, anybody except the same usual suspects that a lot of reporters will go to, and quite frankly, generally not South Asian members, but South Asians will tell you it's not anywhere near a concern that it was almost 4 decades ago, okay? And what this is, I want to call it fear-mongering, but this type of hysteria, when they call Mr. Atwal a terrorist even today, you can say he committed an act of terror, he admits that. To say now, as a reporter said a few weeks ago, I think in a very well-known reporter, that he should somehow be on the no-fly list for an event that occurred that was horrible, again, almost 4 decades ago, that's outrageous. That's outrageous type of commentary. And the South Asian community is, I say, recognizes the problems in the past in this issue, and I'm sure anybody that was around during that time in the 80s and saw what was going on in the temples, and obviously Air India and a lot of other things, I think they would be quite cognizant of that fact. To say today, in entering the 3rd decade of the 21st century, that we are at the level we are at because of this incident on that specific issue is interesting. I'll leave it at that. And that's another theme that needs to be put forward, and you can do with it what you will, but I think that if you approach a lot of respectable members of the South Asian community who are professionals, who are involved in politics, you can't speak to the judiciary, but there's people in the judiciary who have parents that had backgrounds in the World Sikh Organization. If you speak to those people, they'll probably give you a slightly different take on everything. But we appreciate it's always going to be out there. But to say that it is at the extent that it's at now is just not on.
Just a biographical clarification. Is Mr. Atwal a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident?
Yes, no, he's a Canadian citizen.
Since when?
What year were you made as a citizen? 77.
Thank you.
What's his occupation?
Oh, he's retired. He has, he basically does some sales for media, like sells advertising for some media. He's not employed. He's retired. He was formerly a salesperson. He worked in lumber mills when he first came here. He's other than, as I said, that incident that occurred, he's been gainfully, since that time, since he's been released, he's been gainfully employed, and he is trying to move on.
He was, excuse me, there's one question. He was a good citizen for first 4-day visit. He attended Bombay dinner. Suddenly, after visiting from Punjab, when he came back to Delhi visit, when there was a dinner, how come there was a news all around the world that he's a big extremist, militant, Khalistani? Was there any revenge from here or from India? Somebody did it.
He can't answer that. All he could say is, you're all here today, not because this is a fun place to be this afternoon, but because this incident occurred, and he can't speak to why that is.
How many times did Mr. Atwal meet with Mr. Trudeau?
How many times
Has
has
he
he
met
met
him?
him?
Has he met
We can find that out for you again. I'll make another note. He's met him on more than one occasion, and it's nothing more than Mr. Trudeau has, I think, I can say that I know there's at least one picture where Mr. Trudeau, I believe before he was actually the leader of the party, but when he was campaigning, when he came to the local ridings, Mr. Atwal was there in that capacity. I think that there was some connotation in some media that Mr. Atwal had represented that he's friends. I think what the quote was that Mr. Atwal gave about Mr. Trudeau is they were friendly. And Mr. Trudeau is friendly with a lot of people. He's I'm sure, a very friendly person, especially in his role as a politician. The fact is, Mr. Atwal is not friends with Mr. Trudeau. He's not, substantive friends with any politicians, as your question goes. And basically, his relationship is professional.
Has he ever been the guest of any MPs on Parliament Hill?
He has been the guest of MPs on Parliament Hill in 2013 and one occasion in 2014, and those were the incidents that we know of with certainty.
Being his lawyer, what would you like to convey to the politicians who keep on distancing themselves from him, although he has already served his time and he has right to move on?
Look, I guess what I'd say is politicians are politicians, and I respect that, and I think that it's as Mr. Bailey from the Globe asked, that, you know, is he embarrassed? Does he not see the problems with this? Yes, you know, he unfortunately felt that he had moved on, that he had been able to work within normal society, and on that basis, he hoped that maybe some of this would be put behind him. In hindsight, guess what? It hasn't been. No big surprise. He's here before you to, you know, recognize that. He'd like to stay involved with his community in politics as best he can, but he doesn't want to be a distraction.
Can you clarify in what manner he reached out to Mr. Sarai? Was it in person, at his constituency office?
We can find that out for you. I don't believe I believe we talked about that, and to be frank, I think it was either a telephone call or an email. You can't say for sure. You can recall, but it was nothing more than, as I said, I understand that there's going to be a reception. I'm going to be in India at the same time. If I can go, I'm paraphrasing. I'd like to go, and that was the end of it. There was no further badgering, if I can put it that way, of Mr. Sarai or this obsession. He was pleasantly surprised one day, Mr. Atwal, to get an invitation, and that was the end of it.
Who took the photo and how was it released?
That's a really interesting question. We don't know. Certainly, somebody was trying to embarrass somebody. I'll put it that way. That's only speculation. He can't say. He was there. It was not abnormal, as I said, for Mr. Atwal. Certainly in that situation, especially when he's being photographed with the Prime Minister's wife, to expect that he's going to be photographed. Certainly wasn't Mr. Atwal that released it. He was quite happy not to be here today.
Was there any diplomat traveling with him from Vancouver? when he
Oh,
was
absolutely
there?
not. Absolutely not. No, he went as a private citizen. Absolutely.
How many events was he invited to in India?
I think he was invited to both diplomatic, well, I don't know if the first one was a diplomatic event. Both events, after the outcry of the first event, he was invited, but I think he was quite embarrassed by everything for himself and for everyone else, and he certainly didn't attend. I am not certain if the invitation was withdrawn or if he didn't go anyways. He certainly wouldn't have gone, but that's something you can clarify. But it was both events.
Would Mr. Atwal vote for Mr. Trudeau in the future?
He's not going to say who's going to vote for. He can
He's
say that.
right there, can he tell us?
No, he's not. What was that?
I'm asking if he can tell us if he voted for the
I
Prime Minister.
mentioned to a lot of people at the beginning some rules that we were trying to go, and a lot of people said they would respect that. You might not have heard that.
Well, why would hold a press conference if He's not gonna answer any questions.
Did you hear that when we started this?
I heard it.
You, sorry, and as I recall that I said if anybody had a problem with that, they should probably leave. You're still here.
Why won't he answer any questions? Why would you hold a press conference if he's not gonna take any questions?
I think what Mr. Atwal said, first of all, and what was your name, sir?
Jordan Armstrong from Global News.
Mr. Armstrong, just out of curiosity, you did hear me, didn't you?
I heard you, I didn't respond to you. I'm asking you now,
You
why
didn't-
would you hold a news conference? if he's
Sorry,
not gonna
sorry. I
take
just
any
want
questions?
to. I just want to make sure I'm clear here. Sorry, I forgot. Mr. What was your last name again?
Armstrong.
Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong. I just want to make sure we're clear here. What I said on I think about 3 different occasions to everyone who's here right now, Mr. Armstrong from Global
Yeah, I'm
News.
telling you I heard you, I'm just
Mr.
asking you a
let
question
me-
now. Why
let
would you
you,
hold a press conference if he's not gonna take any questions?
Mr. Armstrong, what I said, and I want you to listen to me, and you can ask your question after, and you'll probably get a very similar response, but I want you to not interrupt me if you could be so kind and just listen to me. Mr. Armstrong, from Global News, what occurred is that on 3 separate occasions at least, I explained to the press, certainly on the first 2, that Mr. Atwal is not the most sophisticated speaker in any sense. He's been devastated by this incident. You're probably extremely comfortable by the camera. You seem like a very confident fellow, but he's not probably the same as you. He felt that he wanted to get his story across, that I could take the questions as his counsel, as he has every right to do. I made it very clear, and don't interrupt me until I finish this. I made it very clear to people who, I think it was you that just said, well, I heard you, but I didn't respond, that if anybody has an issue with that, and that was the clear wording, they should advise me now. I didn't hear a peep from you, and that's completely unethical, quite frankly, and you should really consider your position further. Now, do you have any other questions? Do you have any other questions?
Sir, what's your question?
I don't have any questions. Do you have a question for me further? I've said that your position is very, very offside, but do you have further questions you want to ask?
Go ahead.
I don't have anything more to say to you. Do you have anything else? Good.
Make your point.
You said that he was removed from the blacklist last year. If that's the case, how was he able to travel to India in all those previous years, like 2002?
Oh, he was given visas. I think it was 1999 and 2002. We don't have the exact dates, but there's incidences in where he was given, and again, he was given visas then. He was not able to obtain a visa from about 2000. I think his visa, we'll have to find out, but my understanding, and we can clarify this, is that his visa expired in the middle of the 2000s, like 2006 or 7, and he didn't renew it. He will say that he made an attempt to renew it, it was denied, and then he renewed it again in 2017. So he was able to travel before that on those 2 occasions.
Did he have to do anything sort of actively to get lifted off that?
No, not at all. He applied for the visa and it went through the normal channels as best he knows. He doesn't know of what was going on with India because that's not his rubric.
Mr. Gill,
Bill,
there
I
are
just
many.
want to take a closer look at your statement here. You say Mr. Atwal writes he was shocked and devastated when this happened. He wrote, "When I asked to be considered to attend the reception, I assumed there would be no problems. No one at any point indicated there would be any issues." Back in 2012, he was invited to the BC budget at the legislature. There was an outcry.
Yeah.
Someone resigned over it. There were reviews. Was that not a warning sign, an issue that maybe this wasn't appropriate?
Is the question, Mr. Atwal had no right to be there?
No, the question is, does Mr. Atwal think it was appropriate to ask for the invitation in the first place?
I think Mr. Atwal felt that in the circumstances, he did not think it was inappropriate to seek that, and he didn't pursue it any further. He was pleasantly surprised, and when this happened, he removed himself from the situation. I think that's the answer to your question.
Can I hear you explain why he was
I think I've
surprised by
answered-
the outcome?
I think I've answered your
Given that
question.
past history in
I think I've
2012.
answered your question.
You haven't, sir.
Well,
Can you explain
with the
that,
greatest
though?
respect, I've answered as best as I'm going to be able to
Okay.
today. You satisfied with that? Well, probably not satisfied. But that's the best I'm going to do for you right now.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions?
Mr. Gill, like Mr. Atwal, there are many other people who have now joined the mainstream. Their views have changed completely. Has he ever tried to help those people to come into the mainstream or try to help them to get the visa to travel to India?
There's no information I have that Mr. Atwal has had any type of interaction with any foreign government such that he would facilitate people's visas. Certainly, he has been supportive of other members of the community that want to do what he's done, which is renounce those views when he was half the age he is now, and move on with his life as he's done, and he would support people doing that, and many people are doing that. Not-
And concern for Sarai's resignation. You're gonna say, is it good, not good? What
I'm
do you
sorry,
think?
what was?
Any concern about the Sarai's resignation from the Pacific side? So, any
He has no opinion on that. I mean, that's between people in the Liberal Party. I mean, it's something you should ask Mr. Sarai.
Has anyone from the Liberal Party contacted Mr. Atwal?
Not to my knowledge, no. If that's different, I'll confirm that with you.
So who was his first contact to get himself delisted from the Indian government?
That I don't know if
The
he.
media says Ujjwal.
Well, the media says a lot of things. We could find out. I don't know if he. Again, I think as I understand it, and again, this is secondhand information, and not even from my client, but I think you might want to research this. Is the Indian government had, again, on an ongoing basis, had been evaluating their position on many individuals. How that occurred, I think that's a better question for the Indian government, not Mr. Atwal. I think we need to wrap this up. I'll take one more question.
Can I ask you a question?
Sorry, you had a lot of questions. This is the last one. Go ahead.
Mr. Atwal hired you as a lawyer just to speak on his behalf at this press conference, or are you planning to go to court on this issue?
First of all, I'm not going to get into my relationship with my client. That's privileged. I'm here today on behalf of my clients, taking questions. I'm going to answer any further questions that I represented I would, that I couldn't answer the best we can under instructions of my client. That's all I can say. He has no intention to go to court, other than if there is some issue of Mr. Atwal being in any sense slandered or defamed. He'll look at that, but he's put himself out today. He apologizes to certain members of the media for not holding a press conference and not answering the questions that they may wish. But I'm sure, other than Mr. Armstrong, everyone can live with that. Is there any other thing, lastly, before we leave, other than this woman who's had a lot of questions? No? Not you, because we've had a lot of questions as well. Anybody else? No. Good. Thank you very much for coming today.